2 years ago, we had a panel, The New Reality, Teaching and Learning in the 21st Century, Part 1. I don't think we actually called it Part 1 back then, but it was so successful that we're bringing back Part 2. And in that session, we really were leaning into, and what we're going to do even more today is lean into what are the possibilities and the paths forward for teaching and learning. Clark Kerr has famously said, he goes back and looks at the history of institutions in Western Civ and identifies, the Catholic Church, the Lutheran Church, and universities as the most enduring institutions from in our society. The university in particular, and the universities in the United States and in California are incredibly durable and among the most change-resistant of any species of animal or institution that there are, for good and for bad. And so one of the things you should never bet against, you should never bet for policy change or social change or market change causing an institution of higher education to change as well. Until it does. In most of the episodes of transformative change in higher education in the history of the institutions have not been gradual evolutionary change. They haven't been academic Senate resolutions or bills in the state legislature. They have been instant and quick. And then followed up by academic Senate resolutions and things like the master plan that was in the legislature after it had already happened. So we know this is true. We can't bet for any change happening at all until it does. And so what we're doing in this first panel is imagining and reimagining what we should be driving towards, what some of the challenges and opportunities and threats are as well, but really in a sense about what is the possibility. Last time we talked about the higher education's value proposition changing, about the role of the liberal arts and sciences. We had talks about the future of admissions or the no future for admissions, about the cusp of the scientific revolution in teaching and learning. And so so we invited, I think, that entire panel back with some extras. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists and moderators for our first panel. So if you please come on up. Jin Jez, who will be moderating the panel, the Chief Executive Officer of California Competes. No, for real, come on. Candace Thille, who's Associate Professor and Faculty Director for Adult and Workforce Learning at Stanford University. Michael Dennin, Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning and Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education at UC Irvine. Laura Hope. Come on up. Interim Superintendent and President of College of the Desert, and Eduardo Ochoa, President Emeritus at Cal State Monterey Bay. Welcome to our panel.
Climb over. Thank you. I think this is where we sat last time.
Well, good morning, everyone. I love the folks that make it to the opening plenary, arriving last night or very early this morning, and your commitment. And I want to reward that a little bit, which seems to be a theme for the event. Those of you that got your bingo cards, perhaps those that have developed an AI chatbot for their class could raise their hand, number 6, and you guys can look around, find those folks. There we go. And then I will give you, I was very strategic, number 2. Grew up speaking a language other than English. All right, find those friends. All right, thanks for joining us this morning. So continuing from 2022, one of the first questions posed to get the conversation started was, what's a controversial opinion you hold about teaching or learning and the future of it? So to kick us off today, I wanted to ask, what did you say then, and do you still believe that now?
Are we just going in order?
Yeah, great.
Okay, so back then I made 2 statements. One was that everyone should have the opportunity to go to college if they want, but not everyone should have to go to college, either to get the social mobility or whatever, and that we should get rid of college rankings, we should get rid of admissions, and college should be a matching of people with what their interest is and the type of college and the environment they want to go to. So I still believe that. I stand by that statement, and I'm adding to it that we should get rid of all grades. Oh, I guess that's not controversial. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. In 2022, I made the statement that I thought that higher education was struggling to demonstrate its value proposition to potential students. I still think that we are doing that. We see a lot of students who are hesitant to engage in debt and then go and earn a job that is paying them $21, $22 an hour. I think that sometimes we don't think about the outcomes of the programming that we're offering students. So I do think we are continuing on that journey to illustrate our value proposition to students. And I think in order for us to do that, we're going to have to do some redesigning. So I still believe it, yes.
It's a great segue, I feel like, to Eduardo, who...
Yeah, my controversial position, I guess, at the time was that I didn't think it mattered what you majored in college. What mattered was to get a solid liberal arts foundation and capacity in critical thinking and ability to learn. And I think that that has become, I think, even more, something I even believe in more strongly now with some of the AI developments that shows that there's really nothing that can be quantifiable and formulated, turned into a formula, is off limits to what we can do with microprocessors. And therefore, what remains is the ability to maintain human agency and drive the way that we're progressing as a society. And for that, you need those liberal arts supplied critical thinking skills.
I think I said in 2022 that we were on the verge of on the cusp of a scientific revolution in teaching and learning, in the science of teaching and learning. And as we heard in the very opening, institutions like higher education don't change gradually. It's usually a step change. So what I was sort of proposing is we're on the verge of a potential step change. And I actually believe that's still the case. It's taking a while, it will take a while. But I think the controversial part in that is that I think that with the support of the information technology and AI, it will not, contrary to what everyone's afraid of, which is it's going to centralize and standardize what we think of as human knowledge and education, I think it has the potential to do the opposite. It has the potential to put the power in the hands of so many more people that will have a much greater diversity of voices informing not only how to support people to develop knowledge, but what knowledge is worth developing.
Thank you for that. So we have, I feel like, some futurists here who were able to predict and stay consistent. One thing that we had talked about, the panel talked about in 2022 was a little bit around AI. So the question that I'm going to pose is, has AI changed everything? So a couple years ago, Candace, you talked about the importance of knowing more about the learner, the thing being learned, and the context of how learning is taking place. Michael, you talked about the context, but you said whether or not the student learns, you as the teacher are just one part of that. Laura, you talked about the importance of activating learner agency. And Eduardo, you doubled down on a liberal arts education as a way to do that. So I want to know today, how is AI enabled or intersected with all of these things to happen? And then what's the theory, and has that yet to be proved? Candace, I'll throw this out to you first.
Oh, well, we only have 51 minutes left in the session. So when people talk about AI now, most people are thinking generative AI, which is a form of AI, but it's not the only AI. And we've been using AI actually for decades. So I want to make a little bit of distinction between the kind of AI that I was talking about, which is one that can support us to manage multiple features about the learner, features about the thing being learned, features about the context, and the interaction of those features, that's way beyond human cognition. So, but it's not beyond our algorithms to display patterns to us so that we can get insight and make good decisions about how we want to support teaching and learning. Where the generative AI has come in to help is I've been collecting data, doing all kinds of fancy modeling and algorithms to try and generate those insights. But then the question is, how do you provide that insight to a human actor that supports that human actor to retain their agency and make a good decision? And all the charts and dashboards and graphs and stuff that I can show people, I've learned, don't really help. But having a large language model that could be an interface human agent where imagine a faculty member consulting the model that says, wow, today you were going to talk about this, and these students seem to be struggling with this. And then you could probe and say, well, tell me more about why they're not getting that. And then the agent could, looking at their data and all the predictive modeling, give you insight that's answering your questions so that you can support your students better. That's my hope for how the large language models can be used, not as a replacement for large language models. I mean, we can have a whole conversation about this. Large language models cannot be teachers to your students. That might be a controversial perspective, but just straight out, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Candace's point that there are many different kinds of AI, and one that is pretty straightforward and clearly useful is the kind of AI that can help discern patterns that escape human beings.
Yep.
There's a session going on in this conference center about AI and prostate cancer, which I'm sure is about detecting prostate cancer based on a massive amount of data that's been processed by the AI model. Where I'm worried about is on the general language and the large language models, because it struck me at one point. I read that a faculty member made the observation that some of the ChatGPT bogus papers that were turned in by students basically read like mediocre student papers. Like a lot of the papers they'd been getting before, where students sort of hand wave and they make references using the right buzzwords, but don't seem to really have understood the concepts. And so that's a concern. It actually highlights the fact that even before ChatGPT, we were getting a lot of papers like that from students. And so it kind of shines a light on the shortcomings, on how effectively we are educating students and truly providing them those critical thinking skills that are going to be essential. So I think that there's a lot of, we need to do some soul searching in higher ed, and in education generally, about are we truly educating students if we're just simply training them to, feed back to us what we've poured out to them. So that's a question I think that, the future, I think that we need to address includes that.
If I could add something to Eduardo's point about concern, the level of concern about generative AI, I think one of the things that I've observed in my own region is that the rate of change in terms of AI changing everything, which was part of your question, it seems to be changing the K-12 faster than it's changing colleges and universities. And what I mean by that is, because there's such a high level of concern in higher ed, we're holding a lot of AI tools at arm's length rather than really exploring what they do and understanding how to master some of those tools. Holding it at arm's length is probably not going to be helpful for the next evolutionary stage that we go into. I was in an elementary school in Indio, and sixth graders were developing a video on 3 modernist architects, and each of them had different roles in developing this video. All of them were using AI tools. And I remember looking at those students and thinking, we're not ready for you. My community college is not ready for you. But it's partly because of the distance that we're putting between new technology and what we could be doing in the classroom. So I would hope that we would approach these tools with the same vigor and enthusiasm with a level of skepticism as well, in order to make sure the moment doesn't pass us by.
So it's interesting, and I want to build on what your earlier opening comment about value proposition, what Eduardo said, and risk saying something about learning on a panel with Candace, which always makes me nervous because I'm a physicist and she actually studies learning. So I think, in my role as Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning, what I mostly get are all the concerns and worries of faculty bubbling up to me. And what I am feeling or sensing out of that is the concerns with AI are either a conscious or unconscious concern and realization that we actually weren't doing liberal education well, right? That we are very tied in the academy to the written paper and the open talk, in every field. This is not just humanities. In sciences, if you don't write papers well, if you don't write proposals well, if you don't give a good talk, you don't get a job, you're not an academic, right? So our visible tie to our self-worth is the communication piece. And generative AI keeps getting closer and closer to that. And I would argue that is not our core scholarly activity. It's not the core of learning. It's not the core of critical thinking. Yet it is what we are unconsciously committed to, and is also the barrier that creates one of the greatest inequities. If you don't write like us, if you don't talk like us, then you are not educated. And so when there is a tool that gets closer and closer to doing the one thing we've used to set our standards, what does it mean to teach? What does it mean to learn? And where are our standards? And so I think you see K through 12 doesn't have that same tie unconsciously to this aspect of generative AI, so they see a tool to help people learn, right? We have to lean in and really ask the hard questions. What does it mean to get a college education? What is the goal of it? What does it mean to learn? We have to turn to the science of learning in ways we've never had to before. So for me, AI is not a threat in the ways I think it's talked about. It's a challenge to us in the academy to ask ourselves the really, really hard questions about what is the value we're bringing? What are the good things that are happening? So,
Can I just build on that for a moment? Because I think what you're talking about at its core is assessment.
yes.
And a broad range of assessment, meaning what evidence are we collecting to make a judgment that this person does or doesn't know what it is we're hoping they are learning to know
Yes.
and not know. And that the mechanisms that we've historically used for assessment are now doable by the generative AI models. So our assessments are no longer giving us evidence in a way that we can trust. So what we need to do, the response to that is not to say, let's not use these models. The response to that is, let's rethink assessment. And starting with what Michael said, which is, what is it we're really wanting our students to be able to do and know? Because if we don't know that, then we don't know how to assess it, then we don't know what evidence would demonstrate that.
So I feel like a million questions from all of those comments. I'm going to jump to, I think maybe the first one that came to my mind, related, Eduardo, to your comments, but circling back, I feel like with the other comments. What does the role of the teacher and the student look like today, or what should it look like? And have you seen intriguing or inspiring examples of that?
Don't look at me, I'm retired.
So I will actually, I'm trying to think of an intriguing or inspiring example within the classroom. But I'm going to go somewhere. So coming right out of the pandemic, I organized a panel of our athletic coaches, dance instructors, and music, the symphony conductor. Because for me, right, when I think of other spaces of learning, I coached my kids, I love music, I immediately go to athletics, music, art, and drama. They know exactly what they want their students to learn, and they know exactly how to assess it. And the student coach, the student instructor relationship is a partnership. And everybody understands that the athlete, the musician, the artist is there to learn, and they trust that the person on the other side is designing an experience that will maximize their learning, and they learn it in community most of the time, right? Not always, but most of the time it's a symphony, or it's a dance company, or it's an athletic team. Our classrooms are highly individualistic. We don't trust the students. We think they're cheating. They don't trust us. They think we're trying to get them, right? So the inspiring models for me are out there, and they're in those spaces. And so I brought the coaches and the conductor in to say, what is it you do? Why do you think this way? How do you do it? For our instructors to hear, okay, can I import that model into my classroom? How do I build that partnership of trust? How do I center the learner in a way where they trust that I'm here to provide this experience for them, that I have enough expertise to provide an experience where they'll learn, and then eventually, the key part is I still don't know how to add the assessment, because in all those other areas, there's the performance, there's the game, there's that moment of assessment, which we don't have. So I still have a missing piece, and I keep looking around. There are people who are doing inspiring stuff. I'm just drawing a blank right now to think of it.
I mean, one of the things I think I could add is go a little more deeply into this model that I saw of these amazing sixth graders. One of the things that struck me is it's not just rethinking the design of learning, but also the learning space, right? And going to Michael's point about individualism, you know, you go into most college classrooms and, you know, we're in ribbon tables and rows and the collaboration isn't really designed in. And we've talked for a long time, I think, about how, you know, we're trying to shift from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. But I think that is, the guide on the side has also changed in terms of being an architect for the experience of learning, not just a guide. And so what I saw in this sixth grade classroom was the students had an assignment. It required them to research, it required them to read, it required them to develop a video. They had to come up with a score. In other words, they used AI to develop a score for their video. And it was judged by a panel in the class. And it speaks, I think, to some of what Michael's talking about the fact that learning is social, it's collaborative, but it also has to be product-based because we need something to assess as well as the process. And what I loved about watching these students learn was the hunger that they had to develop what they were working on. And when we focus on that individualism, that same level of engagement just is not there. And so I think as we consider what it is we are producing in higher ed, to me, we're not producing people who just know things, right? We were, for years, centuries, focused on developing knowers, right? Now we're focused on knowers and learners, right? People who have agency, people who have curiosity, and people who have hunger. And I saw this instructor design those skills at the end of this assignment because students were striving to know more because of the way the assignment was designed.
So now for a less facetious response. Because, you know, even though I've been retired for 2 years, there was authentic learning going on even before that I can refer to. And probably, for me, the most compelling one was what happened in our Humanities 110 seminar back when I was in college. Small group seminar where the instructor and the students interacted, grappling with concepts, with issues, and real active thinking and reflecting and sharing and interacting was going on in that setting. And that's, you know it when you see it. You understand that people are truly thinking and grappling with those concepts in a real way. Assessing that would be difficult.
So I originally thought the question was, what are examples of productive use of AI in higher education that are inspiring? So
Or intriguing, ones that maybe
Or
just
what?
made you go, or intriguing, maybe
Or
examples that
intriguing.
just made you wonder.
So I had to actually turn to student projects that I've seen, graduate students that I work with at Stanford. 2 projects that I thought particularly interesting. One of them was a project of using a large language model and other AI to support students novice tutors who are trying to support learners, K-12 learners in math. And what the large language model was doing was not directed at the student, not the K-12 math student, but the large language model there was as a performance support to the human tutor. So it was watching the conversation between the student and the human tutor, and then if the human tutor, and it was always present, so only for the human tutor to see, the human tutor could ask for help. It wasn't like it would intrude on the conversation. But if the human tutor was kind of like, oh, how should I help this student here? Then it would suggest like 3 different strategies that the tutor could take that were pedagogically appropriate strategies. And then the human tutor would say that, and then they would get the response from the student. And then that pair of strategy, attempt, and impact on learner was also captured and fed back into the model. And what we saw over time was that the novice tutors became better and better at, they were skill building. They were getting better and better at making effective pedagogical tutoring moves with learners in a diversity of contexts. So that's one example, I think, of an inspiring use of generative AI even to support the teaching and learning process. The second example is a student I'm working with who's actually came to Stanford and enrolled in our PhD program in education, but he's a medical doctor in Chile. And he got very interested in medical education, and particularly medical education that's available to people all over the world as opposed to at Stanford. At Stanford, at the bottom of the Stanford Hospital, we have a full floor that is dedicated to medical simulation, where medical students at Stanford go in and, with trained actors, practice interacting with patients and developing their critical reasoning and diagnosis. And there are experts behind the screen that are scoring them and giving them feedback, and a very robust learning experience, very expensive, not available to most people in the world. So his interest is, how do I let that quality of development of clinical reasoning, make that available to people in Chile? And not only just that skill, but also all the cases they're doing are cases that are appropriate to Western medicine, to things that we see. So he wanted a facility, so we're using AI now to allow doctors all over the world to generate these cases for supporting clinical reasoning about diseases that are important to their local context and the way you'd probe that, and using the AI to create a simulated patient as opposed to a paid actor with whom that physician, developing physician, can interact and develop the skills of clinical reasoning and diagnosis. So those are 2 examples that I see of using generative AI to really support teaching and learning, and also make it, as I said, my hope in the beginning, a much greater diversity of voices and empowerment talking about what should be learned and how it should be learned.
Thank you for both those examples. And the second one I want to follow up on, I appreciate the focus around leveraging technology to advance equity and global equity. Technology, AI, like everything else, isn't sort of typically equitably distributed. I'm curious how the panel has seen or thinks about how do we ensure that technology, AI, doesn't, at a minimum, exacerbate our already significant equity gaps in higher ed, but ideally could help close those gaps. How are you guys thinking about this, or other exciting things that you've seen that are trying to solve for this?
Well, I can sort of take the economist perspective on this. If you're going to have innovation, technical change occur in a market setting, it has to improve productivity. Otherwise, it won't be adopted. So I think that inherent in the motivation by private companies to develop AI is that it can actually help you do things better, cheaper, faster. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm more worried about something else, which is that the cheaper and the faster may drive out a little bit the better. And so, we might get AI-generated somewhat more cookie cutter approach to education, widely distributed, while the more, boutique, curated experience is preserved for the elite. I think that's where there's more of a danger.
So what do we do about that?
Address income inequality.
There are already places. I mean, I think in my introduction we talked about that I was at Carnegie Mellon before I was at Stanford, and founded this project called the Open Learning Initiative, which still exists, led by Norman Beer, who's here, and I highly encourage everyone to go speak to Norman in the Open Learning Initiative, because that is a project. It's an completely open source software. And the authoring environment, the delivery environment are open, so faculty anywhere can create a learning experience and have the underlying power of the AI and the technical infrastructure for them to decide, how do I want to teach something, what's important to teach, et cetera. So I think that those kinds of projects that are open, not-for-profit, by and for higher education, taking it on for ourselves, are a way of making sure that equity is infused in the development. I've worked on both sides of the corporate academic divide. Spent 5 years as the director of learning science at Amazon, which was great in terms of having the technology. I had 80 people on my team, so I could build the technology. I know what it takes. Don't have that here in not-for-profit higher education if we try and do it by ourselves. But collectively, we can put together teams that can build that kind of robust technical infrastructure.
I feel like it means a lot when Candace from Stanford says that too. When if Stanford doesn't have the resources to launch it, like the rest of us, I think that's a clear signal.
Yeah. It's true. One of the big computer science faculty at Stanford raised the flag saying, do you know how expensive these NVIDIA chips are? And the compute power, and even an institution as rich as Stanford can't afford to have the compute power that it needs to push forward the research in this area. And so the fear is we're going to lose our best researchers, not because some other company's going to pay them more. That's never pulled us away. But being able to do our research, having the facility to do our research, if the universities can't provide that cuts at the core of what we're trying to do. Yeah. So that's a whole different dimension on equity, I think. But I think the answer is collectively we can do stuff that we can't do if we stay on our individual institutional silos.
Let's talk more about that. So AI is expensive, technology is expensive. So what should that model look like? You said collaborative. I don't know if you've thought more about specifically what does that collaboration look like? Who should bear the cost? What's the financial model? How do we do this?
Yeah, no, that's a big question, and people have tried to, even within the Open Learning Initiative history, people have tried to come up with sustainable economic models for continuing to build and and it's a challenge. I mean, I know, as I said, Norman Beer, you can talk with him. He's playing around with different ones, but I think, I'm a learning scientist. I'm not an economist, in spite of teaching a class in the business school, I'm not a business professor. So coming up with sustainable economic models, I think, is a whole area of investigation that we should be doing.
Just to follow up on that, when we say AI is expensive, and I say it's actually more productive or more cost effective, those two things are not incompatible. It means that the initial investment is massive. But you do realize economies of scale by doing that, and you're able to do things more efficiently when you're delivering a service or a product. So the challenge is how do we reach scale to invest at the levels that need to be invested?
I also think it goes back to your opening comments about our value proposition, right? I think, I just think of the evolution of research and science, and a lot of what happened. You had this ebb and flow, right? For a while, you had AT&T, Bell Labs, you had IBM, where there was massive investment by companies in the research that was, for reasons I don't completely understand, sort of handed off completely to universities. And the idea was, well, the government will fund it, and then we can benefit from the science that comes out of the basic research, and we don't need to be in it. And so maybe part of it is rediscovering that value of sort of the university corporate partnership in ways we don't really have right now, because it's unclear what our value is, what we're bringing to it. Whereas I think if we can articulate that better, maybe these partnerships would then be easier to do.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think that, we are just thinking about adding costs to existing structures. And in higher ed, I was saying to someone yesterday, we're really good at adding, we're not so good at subtracting. And so we have a lot of things that don't work, that are expensive, that we ought not to do anymore. And so, if we think about replacement value of things that we are investing in, in favor of newer things that do support teaching and learning, I think that is also worth our consideration. Unfortunately, our systems are built on this kind of ever excavating model where we just put more stuff on top of the existing stuff. And we expect students to excavate that rather than us subtracting the things that no longer serve us well. So I think that's another part of our value proposition as we analyze the way forward.
That's an excellent point. I think particularly as, our state pushes through tough financial times. What are some of the things that you think should go?
I was going to ask that too.
Well, if I can just share one of the things that I think I don't want to oversimplify it, but I will say the continuous struggle with textbook providers is one of the things that chafes me. And based on some of the heads that I'm see nodding, they're criminals. And exactly. So when I think about the amount of investment that we make in those kinds of very transitory materials, I think those are things that need a lot of evaluation on our part in terms of how we change the calculus of where we make our investments. I also think, too, we need to think about what the human experience brings to our students and what we can automate. So for instance, and this is probably a heretical statement that maybe is the new one that I'll add to this year, is that, we hire counselors to sit with students for an hour to develop education plans. If we have maps that help students do that on their own, all we need is someone to review it and check in with them. And then counselors can spend more time dealing with the more nuanced and sophisticated issues that students have. It's not that we don't need counselors, it's that we're investing in the wrong part of that job, right? And so I think there are some reprioritizing that we can do in terms of our human experience in order to make the student have a more productive engagement with the college or the university rather than using human beings to do the things that we can automate.
So in that space, my heretical view is we have a lot of really, really expensive YouTubers on our campus. We call them faculty, and we pay them to deliver lectures that are on YouTube that are just as good. And the realization for this came to me when, thank you for the few applause.
Michael, we're going to have trouble getting out of here.
I know. No, this is the friendly crowd. We're going to have trouble getting back on our campus when the video is released. But we had a student send an email to the physics department of, about a particular class. I won't name the class. And they're like, I kept finding better lectures on YouTube. Why is this person in front of me in the class? And I, in my most egotistical moments, I know I'm one of the best lecturers there is. I also know there's better lectures for any given topic on YouTube. I'm better than some, they're better than me. But video has reached a transformation point, right? Lectures are amazing for transforming information. I don't want to denigrate the lecture too much because there's a reason it exists and has a value. We just have another way of doing it now. And I said I'm going to steal your line. Educational architects.
Yes.
Did I get it right?
Yes.
Right. Our value as faculty is in so many other spaces, and we're using us in a very expensive, ineffective way. And if we can use us and use our expertise and leverage our expertise, our scholarly expertise, our disciplinary expertise, in ways that are way more effective, there actually are hidden savings there that can be leveraged to do other things. So I think recognizing these things that we're doing in these different spaces, it's not that we don't need faculty and instructors, we need them, we just aren't using them effectively.
Can I build on that? Because I think what we're all talking about is turning education into a design challenge. And thinking, okay, we have 3 sets of resources that we can bring to bear to support a learner. We have faculty members, experts in the field. We have peers, the other people that are sitting in the class with them. And then we have the technology. And what the technology can do is always changing. So really thinking about it as, given what we're trying to achieve to support that learner, given the resources we have available and the constraints in our particular system, how do we best design an experience that leverages the strengths and diminishes the risks of each of those resources? And it's a constant feedback mechanism. So you're always trying, this is what I love about it, about having the technology also, is it turns every single one of us. I've always been fascinated that I was trained as a researcher and I teach. Most of my colleagues were trained as researchers and teach, but somehow when they enter the classroom to teach, that research brain just kind of shuts off and I go into doing what I've always done and what I think works. And sort of rethinking that as our teaching is our research, because we're trying to support a learner to go from here to here, and we have a hypothesis about what we can do to help them go from here to here, and every time we do it, that's a test. And if we could start collecting all of those interventions and the responses to those interventions, just like I described in the little tutoring example, then we can start building a database of collective wisdom about how to support which learners learning what kinds of things under which conditions. And that's the scientific revolution we need.
So I want to bring up an issue. Good. I want to bring up a totally different issue because we haven't addressed them. It's sort of the elephant in the room, and there's 2 actually. One is COVID, the impact of COVID on our students, and secondly, the impact of social media on the students. And the combination of those 2, and the fact that many of us that switched to Zoom to teach got a sobering look at the environment that students are operating in. We have a new challenge, which is we are facing students that are socially now underdeveloped, that don't have the skills to interact with each other and with us the way they used to, perhaps. Here's another challenge that is facing higher ed that is it's going to be part of our future, even if it's not AI related, which is how do we cope with that? How do we bring that in and compensate for this handicap, frankly, that students are coming in with?
I have tweens, so I empathize on this one deeply and personally. Maybe at the reception we could all chat more about thoughts on that one. I do want to make sure we have time for folks here to ask questions. So I don't know if we want people to sort of line up somewhere, or we're going to run a mic around, but if you have questions, start to formulate them. We're going to do a lightning round for a couple minutes, and then we will jump to audience Q&A. So sort of like 1 sentence, 20-second responses for this lightning round. So at the end of the day today, we're going to have a panel called The Perfect Storm: AI, Labor Unrest, Deficits, Elections, Population Declines, and War. I'll throw in social media, the pandemic. What effects do broader societal forces have on the role and functioning of higher ed institutions? Can higher ed institutions save us? Or will they succumb to the gathering storms? Hopefully it is the former. We want to pass on your best advice. What's the single most important thing that higher ed can do to enable thriving? So 20-second, one-word kind of response here.
I'll start. Break down silos and change the relationship between learning research and teaching practice.
I think higher ed is actually doing this, which is developing respect for evidence and rational thought. I think that you'll notice, I'll have to bring in politics here, sorry. There's increasingly the political divide is correlating with whether or not people have a college education. So I think college is already doing this willy-nilly, developing this capacity in people, and I think we need to double down on that.
I think to develop the kind of communities that we all want to live in, I would say shifting the experience of students from design, from knowledge carriers and teachers as knowledge deliverers to designers of knowledge discovery. Because that engagement of discovery is what's going to keep us from disaster.
Yeah, the curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would say what I said earlier, which is moving to a new contract with our students, a contract of trust where we believe they're here to learn and they believe we're here to design a learning experience for them and build that trust.
All right, let's go to the audience, and I could pepper more lightning rounds in as needed.
Looks like
Here we go.
Hi, I'm Bror Saxberg. I'm a learning engineer, and I'm curious, in the long-term future that's coming, building on what Candace said, classrooms need much more of an integrated perspective between the learning sciences and then what's actually happening. Who is supposed to be the learning engineer in that mix? Is it faculty who have to be retrained to have yet another career on top of their careers as researchers, administrators, et cetera? Do they have to now become learning engineers? Or do we need a new group that comes in so faculty can set outcomes, learning engineers consult with them, and so forth? How do you see that working? Who's going to bring this practically to you all?
Is that a question to me, Bror? Okay, I'll answer it. Well, I think right now, where we don't have the technical infrastructure and the business processes to shift that relationship, then we do need another role, like a learning engineer, that can, like you would have a TA or somebody that helps support the faculty member to make this shift. But in the longer term, I see the technical infrastructure and the teaching and learning process to be such that just by the very act of teaching, you are engaging in experimentation and observation and feedback. But in the interim, yeah, I think people need support to do so. I don't expect every faculty member in this room to become learning scientists. It's not your interest or training, yeah.
If I can also add, I think too, we hardly ever talk about the student as the teacher. And in situations that I think that I've seen that have been designed well, the students also can take on some of that role. I'm not saying that we create a free-for-all and expect them to go unguided into exploration, but I think the best learners are willing to find teachers everywhere, even in themselves.
And I just want to add, Candace, to what you said, something you said earlier, remind everyone. I think a lot of what we're talking about, it is a change for faculty, but I think so much is gained by it mostly being a focus shift, not a retraining shift, right? It's a focus to leveraging your scholarly expertise already into the classroom, leveraging your skills as a researcher into the classroom. There is some scaffolding and help. There needs to be the staff who can help you make that connection and see why this skill set you're using over here is so valuable to this space over here. But it's not a total retraining and retooling. I think staff in our Division of Teaching Excellence and Innovation have said it very well. our job here is we've done the literature research. We're like a grad student. We're like a TA. We've done the literature research for you. We know these things. You're the subject matter expert. You're the scholar in the field. You know what is, and we just need to meet with you for an hour or two and discuss and sort of help you with this, and now you can do that. And maybe I'm way overly optimistic, but I do think there's work out there and models out there that show that this can be quite successful and productive.
And if I can say something that connects to both of you, is that in that enterprise, the design element is making the learning transaction more transparent, right? And that's the level of engagement, right, that also drives learners to engage more deeply, is when that transaction is more transparent.
Can you give a concrete example of like what a transparent transaction looks like?
Yeah, the first example that comes to mind for me is, so I taught English for 20 years. And any other English teachers out there? Okay, you're in the house. One of the things that, so I started teaching in the late 80s, and the emphasis in the 80s was still on a lot of practice, reinforcement, but I came at a time when we were shifting to helping students understand the thinking around grammatical errors, right? Rather than learning rules, right? Which is what people are traditionally taught. And so when you can help people understand the function of what they are doing, rather than the rule that governs what they are doing, that is a different mental process, right? And what I could help understand, and what I would have talk to students about the structure of their sentences, I would say things like, why are you doing this? And they would say, well, what do you mean? Why am I doing it? And I would say, well, why is this here? What do you mean, why is it there? I said, what is it doing, right? And the question about what is it doing is a different question than what is the rule, right? And that helped them kind of unlock a logical and critical element of their own thinking so that they understood that it wasn't about memorizing a rule. It was about designing a thought, right? Which is very, very different experience for a learner. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It does. I wrote that down to use with my kids. Do we have another question?
Hi, my name is Sid from Berkeley School of Education. My question is to Dr. Candace. You spoke of a database of collective wisdom. Can you elaborate on that? What kind of a design challenge would it be, et cetera?
Oh, yeah. If you're interested in this, we should talk afterwards, because
if you're into
it is about, at this point in time, anything that can be technology mediated, where we can, I don't know how to describe this briefly, where you're essentially capturing pairs of intervention and impact, and over multiple diverse contexts, learning multiple diverse things, so that you can then look for patterns to be able to disclose patterns that show with a high probability for this learner in this context, trying to learn this thing, this might be a good strategy to use. But right now, those models, those kinds of models are not being trained on a very robust data set. So starting to get everybody contributing your instructional strategies and the student impact to create a new data set over which we can run algorithms to better, you were saying about the teaching and learning centers, say we know how this works, we just need to transfer that knowledge to the faculty. What we know now, yes, but the thing is, we don't know everything. Yep. And there's a whole bunch we don't know. It's just like when we come up with theories of learning and we pass it over to practitioners and say, and it doesn't work when they try it in their classroom, and then the researcher says, that's because you didn't do it with fidelity. And the practitioner says, no, it's because your theory doesn't work in the reality of the world. You know, they're both right. And we need a different paradigm. So we need people actually doing things in the real world and collecting all of those different features so that we can start extracting from that principles or knowledge about more generalizable instructional differentiation.
Thank you. I'm going to pepper in the lightning rounds really quickly because I want to know what you guys say. Quickly, and then we'll get to more audience questions. 10 years from now, will California's 3 segments become more or less differentiated?
Okay, so I've been trying to figure out how to work this in. I'm supposed to put in a plug for the collective activity where we are going to talk a little bit about California Teaching and Learning Collaborative, which is an attempt to bring in some intersegmental efforts that might make us more collaborative. So be alert. It's going to be a fun session. There, I got that in. But also, you know, I would hope, and I don't think it's going to be in 10 years, my challenge with our 3 segments is the ideal was these are 3 parts of a system that each have a different role. You have a major research university, you have a master's granting institution, and you have the community college. They have become 3 segments with different levels of prestige. That's the de facto way they work. And that doesn't work as a collaborative system in my mind. So I would like them to stay differentiated, but differentiated around experience, purpose, goal, but not around resources and prestige. So I'm not answering your question because I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years or if we're going to get there. I'm just giving you my hope and goal and vision.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think we certainly see trends of us becoming less differentiated, but I don't know that that trend is going to hold. I think in order for us to clarify what's going to happen with that, I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about the master plan being reinterrogated. And I think as a state, we need to do that.
I feel like every year we do.
We
So
always
it feels like.
We always rumor it, we don't do it, yeah.
Yeah, I could talk for an hour about this because it's an issue very dear to my heart. I think that there's pressures to break down the differentiation, but the pressures that are coming from a bad place, in my opinion. They're coming from the kind of mentality that you mentioned, which is this idea that there's a single canonical set of criteria of excellence in higher education, and you have to move up the food chain if you're an institution. Yeah. So if you haven't read it, I would recommend Boyer's Scholarship Reconsidered book, which is a great treatment of this issue. I think a good way that this could happen, not so much more or less differentiation, but perhaps closer collaboration and integration. I think that would be a real benefit.
Definitely, like this.
Yeah. And closer collaboration around specifically the questions of teaching and learning. And that's why we designed the California Learning Lab to insist that it has to be projects have to be intersegmental because they're around teaching and learning.
All right, we've got a little over 2 minutes left, so we can get another.
Hi there. I appreciate the presentation, particularly on the teaching and learning, and I'm just wondering if you could give us a response to the responsibility of students in their own learning, because you've spoken very heavily on the faculty side, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about what should we expect of the students in their own learning.
I'll just say briefly, I mean, I think that's the heart of my hope of renegotiating the contract, right? Like, higher ed is sort of, for many students, that last step between, quote, going into the workforce, hopefully not the last time they learn. And my analogy to sports, music, art, right? The learner is fully committed and knows the responsibility to learn is primarily on them, and everybody else is around there to support them and provide an environment in which they can learn. And so we have that implicitly in our system, that it's up to the student to actually decide to learn or not. But we do it, I think, in a very negative way. And I would like that to be just a more positive partnership where it's transparent that, yeah, you're paying to come here to learn, but we are providing you an optimized, as much as we can optimize with what we know, and constantly evolving and re-optimizing environment for that learning to occur. I know, I think that gets at your question. I hope it does.
So am I the only one that still teaches on this?
No, I still teach.
Okay, great. So I still teach.
I want that on record publicly.
I teach, I just don't teach students.
Okay, I still teach students, and every quarter, every single one of my classes, I start off by saying, these are my plans about what the learning outcomes will. By spending 10 weeks here in this class with me and with each other, by the time we finish this class, this is what you will be able to do and know that you can't do and know right now. Look at this, take it really seriously, because it's going to be a lot of work. So every one of you needs to sit there and look at that and say, is that worth my spending 10 weeks here and all the work and stuff it's going to take? Because if it's not, you have two choices. You can say what you want it to be different, and if it's within my expertise and the rest of the class agrees, then we can shift what we're all shooting for. But if not, then don't stay in the class, because I need every one of your full participation, because we're co-creating a learning experience. So that's how I communicate explicitly to the students what their role is. It's not to pass the class, it's to co-create the knowledge and capabilities in this community.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you all for this amazing panel. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Take it over.
Yeah, Sujin, Michael, Laura, Eduardo, and Candace, thank you. This was an amazing panel and an excellent start to our 2 days together. For those of you who 2 years ago, well, for those of you for whom this is the first time, you might be really impressed with this panel, that their identification of the future trends 2 years ago turned out to be so spot on. I have to acknowledge there were 4 other panelists 2 years ago that we didn't invite today. They got it incompletely wrong. So this is how we learn here. But really, inspiring about what our purpose is for these 2 days, but also that these weren't just futurists randomly pontificating and thinking about these issues, but real life college presidents, vice provosts, folks that are doing this work as well. And so really great start and a table setting for us over these next couple of days. I will only disagree with Sujin one time. She said the state's going through some financial crisis. Lark, I'm going to skip ahead. There's a very good chance I will be entering the California State Senate in December. And so I just want to say, the state is not, we are, so I was really paying attention to what's happening in the next 10 years that the panel just talked about. But the state's not in a financial crisis. The state is in a budget crisis, which is different because you might have noticed property values, they're not going down, so our property taxes aren't declining. People are buying stuff, which is part of what has contributed to inflation, but they're paying their sales taxes. The reason why we think of ourselves in a crisis is that nobody is IPOing their companies, that there aren't that many stock options being cashed in. We have a system that's highly progressive in California for our revenues, but as a result, it turns out ultra-wealthy people don't get W-2s. They don't have regular withholding, so we get really wild fluctuations in our revenues. And so that's horrible right now. We're all facing that, those of us that are in institutions. And so thinking about buying an NVIDIA chip at Palo Verde College or Riverside Community College is just so out of scope to think about how might we do this work. And yet it will only take 1 or 2 major IPOs and the state's budget will be back to what it was 2 years ago. Or a set of stock options that just happen to be expiring next year. These are things that we don't study in public finance, but is the state of California. And so I know for some of us walking in today, we're like, how do we think about reimagining the future of teaching and learning? I just got notice from my dean that we're going to have to, cut this and cut that, and there will be no COLAs for this and no investments. But the thing about California is that could change in a minute, at any minute. And so part of what I really appreciate about the panel, and especially Laura's suggestions, it's rare to have a college president be asked, well, where would you specifically cut? And she's ready to go. Here we go. Don't stop me until I'm done. And so thank you to the first panel, and that's just a slice of what's to come. We're now going to take a break for 15 minutes. And please grab some refreshments, because I'm sure you're starving after that very light breakfast that we had. But also head out the ballroom doors and visit some of the exhibitors, talk with them as well. And then just a reminder, when you come back, this is the one moment when that number on your badge will mean something. Please come back, and if you're willing, sit at the table number that's on the badge, and there's also a map that's featured on the screen, so you can check that out before you go on the break. And if you have any trouble finding your table, please ask the staff for help. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, then we will come back for the collective activity. Enjoy.